Have you ever felt like life can change in an instant? One moment everything seems normal, stable, even predictable. Then, without warning, everything you've worked for is suddenly gone. Imagine dedicating years of your life to serving others, showing up every day with unwavering commitment, only to lose everything overnight. Maria had spent years cooking meals in one of the most powerful households in the world, never asking for recognition, never expecting anything more than the dignity of her work. She had built her life on discipline, on sacrifice, on the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was doing something meaningful. But then came the storm. The rain poured relentlessly, flooding homes, washing away entire lives in a matter of hours. When the water receded, Maria was left standing in front of nothing. Her home was gone. Everything she had worked for, everything she had saved, destroyed in an instant. Yet the very next morning, she showed up for work as if nothing had happened. No complaints, no requests for help. She carried on, hiding the weight of her loss behind the same steady hands that had prepared countless meals for others. But what she didn't know was that someone had noticed. And when Donald Trump found out what had happened, his response was immediate. He did something no one expected, something that would change Maria's life forever. What he did next left everyone in shock. Stay with us, because this is a story about loyalty, compassion, and the kind of leadership that few ever get to witness firsthand. If you believe in leadership, power, and second chances, this is the place for you. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to never miss an inspiring Trump story. Maria had never been a woman who sought the spotlight. She had spent most of her life moving through kitchens, the rhythmic sounds of chopping, simmering, and sizzling guiding her days. Cooking was not just a job to her, it was a craft, a passion, a language that required no words. She understood flavors the way an artist understands color, combining the simplest ingredients with a precision that transformed them into something more. Long before she found herself working in one of the most powerful households in the world, Maria had known hardship. Born into a family where survival depended on resilience, she had learned early on that life did not hand out opportunities freely. She had started working as a teenager, taking any job she could to help support her family. It was in the kitchens of small diners and neighborhood restaurants that she found her rhythm, where she first discovered that food had the power to bring people together. She worked tirelessly, never turning down a shift, never complaining when the hours stretched long into the night. She perfected the details that others overlooked, how a slow simmer could coax out the deepest flavors, how fresh herbs could elevate even the simplest dish. But beyond technique, she understood something more important. Cooking was not just about feeding people. It was about comfort, about making someone feel at home, even in the most unfamiliar places. When she was offered a position in Donald Trump's household, she accepted without hesitation. She knew little of the world of wealth and power she was stepping into, but she knew how to cook. And in her world, that was all that mattered. At first, she kept to the background, quietly observing the routines of the household, learning the preferences of those she now served. She noticed the small details, the way Trump preferred his steak, the way certain meals were requested on specific days, the way a perfectly timed dish could set the tone for an entire evening. She adapted quickly, mastering the unspoken rules of a household where expectations were high and excellence was the standard. But over time, something changed. She was no longer just a cook. She became a fixture, a presence that went beyond the meals she prepared. She worked with precision, with care, with the kind of dedication that could not be faked. She took pride in her work, ensuring that every dish that left her kitchen was flawless. Not because she had to, but because she believed that any job worth doing was worth doing right. Trump was not a man who overlooked effort. He recognized discipline when he saw it, valued those who gave their all, no matter their position. He did not speak in platitudes, did not hand out praise easily, but he noticed. He saw the way Maria never cut corners, the way she worked tirelessly to perfect even the smallest details. Over time, a quiet respect grew between them, unspoken but undeniable. Maria never sought favors. She never asked for anything beyond the dignity of her work. She was not intimidated by the world of wealth around her, nor was she envious of it. She had built her life with her own hands, and she had always believed that as long as she could work, she would be fine. But there are moments in life that remind even the strongest among us that resilience alone is not always enough. There are forces that no amount of preparation can withstand, storms that strip away everything we have built in an instant. And when that moment came for Maria, when the life she had spent years constructing was suddenly washed away, she did what she had always done. She kept working. She did not complain, did not ask for help. She believed she could bear it alone. What she did not realize was that someone had already noticed. And Donald Trump was not the kind of man to let loyalty go unanswered. Maria had never feared the rain. She had grown up in a place where storms were common, where the sound of heavy drops pounding against rooftops was more familiar than silence. Rain had always been a reminder of the world's unpredictability, of nature's quiet power, but she had never imagined that one night of relentless downpour would strip her of everything she had spent a lifetime building. The storm came without mercy. The first few drops had been nothing more than an inconvenience, a warning that no one took seriously. But within hours, the sky had darkened into something ominous, a swirling force of wind and rain that did not hesitate, did not relent. The streets outside Maria's modest home quickly transformed into rivers, the water rising faster than anyone had anticipated. At first, she believed it would pass, as all storms do. She moved through her small house, securing what she could, tucking away the belongings she had spent years collecting, the carefully chosen furniture, the framed photographs that held memories of a life built through sheer determination. But no preparation could have been enough. When the water began seeping in under the doors, she knew. When the floor beneath her feet became a shallow pool, when the walls trembled under the pressure of wind that howled like an angry beast, she understood that the home she had worked so hard to keep was no longer hers to protect. There was no time to save anything. There was no time to do anything but move, to gather what little she could carry and step out into the night, into the chaos that had swallowed her neighborhood whole. She watched as the water consumed her home, as everything she had once called hers was reduced to floating debris, carried away without a trace of sentimentality. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun had risen over a landscape unrecognizable, a neighborhood stripped of its identity. What had once been streets lined with homes and carefully tended gardens was now nothing more than wreckage. The people who had lived there moved through the ruins in stunned silence, picking through what remained, searching for something, anything that had survived. Maria found nothing. The place where her home had stood was now just an empty shell, a space filled with waterlogged remnants of a life that no longer existed. She did not cry. She did not allow herself the luxury of despair. There was no time for grief, no use in mourning what could not be undone. She had lost everything, but she was still standing. And that, she told herself, was enough. So when the time came to decide what to do next, she did what she had always done. She went to work. She arrived at Trump's estate, as she always had, moving through the grand halls with the same quiet efficiency, preparing meals with the same precision. No one would have guessed that the hands expertly chopping vegetables, carefully plating dishes, had just lost everything they had ever owned. She did not speak of it. She did not mention the weight pressing down on her chest, the exhaustion that came not from work, but from knowing there was no home waiting for her at the end of the day. Maria believed in resilience, in carrying on when the world gave you every reason to stop. She believed in the dignity of silence, in the strength of self-reliance. But what she did not know was that someone had already seen past the mask she wore, Someone had noticed the quiet tension in her movements, the slight hesitation in a woman who never hesitated. And Donald Trump was not a man who ignored the struggles of those who had given him their loyalty. He had heard what had happened. He knew, and he was about to do something about it. Donald Trump's journey is filled with resilience, bold decisions, and unforgettable moments. Stay inspired. Like this video, drop a comment below, and subscribe to be part of this movement. Maria had always believed that dignity was not in what a person owned, but in how they carried themselves when everything was taken away. She had never been one to complain, never been the type to ask for pity or special treatment. No matter how hard life had been, she'd always found a way to keep moving forward, her head held high, her pride intact. So after the storm had taken everything from her, after she had stood in the wreckage of what had once been her home, she made a decision. She would not let anyone know. She would not burden others with her struggles, would not allow the weight of her loss to be carried by anyone but herself. When she arrived at work the next morning, there was no hesitation in her steps. She moved through the familiar kitchen with the same steady rhythm, her hands finding their way through tasks that had become second nature to her. The scent of spices filled the air, the quiet sounds of chopping and simmering wrapped around her like an old routine, a reminder that at least here in this place, she still had control. She prepared meals as she always had, ensuring that everything was plated to perfection, that every dish left her hands exactly as it should. If there was any tremor in her fingers, if there was an exhaustion in her body that ran deeper than physical tiredness, she did not let it show. But something had changed, even if she refused to acknowledge it. The weight of what she had lost lingered in the edges of her movements, in the moments of stillness between one task and the next. It was there, in the way she stood just a little longer at the sink, staring at the water swirling down the drain, as if it reminded her of something she could not quite put into words. It was in the way she took just a fraction of a second longer to respond when someone called her name, as if she had to pull herself back from a place far away. Her colleagues began to notice. They didn't know what had happened, didn't understand the quiet shift. In the woman who had always been steady, always been the one they could rely on. At first, they thought it was just exhaustion, a long week catching up to her. But as the days passed, the feeling in the air changed. Maria still smiled when spoken to, still answered questions with the same warmth she always had. But there was something different in her eyes, something they couldn't quite name. She was there, but at the same time she wasn't. She never spoke about it. She never gave them a reason to ask. But there were moments when they caught her in the quiet, when she thought no one was looking, when she believed she was alone. Those were the moments when her shoulders slumped just slightly, when the weight she carried pressed down on her in a way she could not fully hide. Still she worked. Still she moved through the kitchen with the same precision, the same dedication, because in her mind, this was what she could control. This was what she had left. But what she did not know was that she was not as invisible as she believed. Donald Trump had spent a lifetime reading people, understanding the unspoken things that others missed. He had built empires, negotiated deals that others thought impossible, and he had done it not just by speaking, but by knowing when to listen, when to observe. And now, as he watched Maria continue working as if nothing had changed, he saw what no one else did. She was trying to carry the weight alone, but she didn't have to, and soon she would realize that she wasn't as alone as she thought. Maria had always been careful with her words. She knew that hardship was not something to be shared lightly, that struggles were often best kept to oneself. But there were moments, no matter how strong a person was, when the weight of loss became too heavy to bear in silence. One afternoon, as she stood in a quiet corner of the estate, away from the bustling kitchen, she finally let her guard down. She had thought she was alone, that no one could hear her as she spoke softly into the phone, explaining to a relative the full extent of what had happened. She spoke of the storm, of how the rain had poured down without mercy, how the flood had come so fast that there had been no time to save anything. She spoke of the home she had built, the years of work that had gone into every small piece of furniture, every belonging that now lay in ruins. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated the facts, her tone steady, her resolve unshaken. But the pain was there, woven into every word. What she did not know was that she was not alone. A security staff member had been passing by when he heard her voice, something about the way she spoke making him pause. He had worked on the estate long enough to know who Maria was, to recognize the quiet strength she carried. He had seen how she worked, how she moved through her days without complaint, how she never asked for anything. And now he was hearing the truth she had, hidden from everyone. He hesitated only for a moment before making a decision. There were things that could be ignored, things that were not his business, but this was not one of them. He relayed what he had heard to someone higher up, someone who would know what to do, and within hours, the message had reached Donald Trump himself. Trump did not hesitate. He did not brush it off as someone else's problem, did not assume that Maria would figure it out on her own. He had built his career on understanding people, on recognizing value, not just in wealth, but in character. And Maria had character. He immediately demanded details. He wanted to know exactly what had happened, how much she had lost, what she needed. He asked the kind of questions that left no room for vague answers, the kind that meant something was already being set into motion. Those around him could see the shift in his demeanor. He was not simply acknowledging the situation. He was taking action before anyone had the chance to suggest otherwise. Maria had spent her life making sure others were taken care of, ensuring that the meals were perfect, that those around her had what they needed. And now, for the first time in a long time, someone was making sure that she did not go unnoticed. She had given years of loyalty without expecting anything in return. But Donald Trump was not a man who let loyalty go unanswered. And Maria was about to learn exactly what that meant. Donald Trump had never been the kind of man to hesitate. He had built his empire on decisiveness, on understanding when a moment required immediate action. Leadership to him was not just about authority, it was about responsibility. It was about recognizing when something needed to be done and ensuring that it happened without delay. So when he heard what had happened to Maria, there was no pause, no contemplation. He did not dwell on the unfairness of it, did not waste time on sympathy that would not change her reality. He simply acted. The moment the details reached him, he called his most trusted staff together. His voice was sharp, cutting through the room with the kind of authority that left no room for questions. He wanted facts, not vague summaries. He wanted to know the full extent of the damage, what had been lost, what she needed, what could be done. His staff scrambled to gather information, making calls, reaching out to those who could provide answers. Within minutes, reports were coming in. Maria had lost everything. Her home, her belongings, the security she had spent years building had been washed away in a single night. She had no insurance to fall back on, no savings substantial enough to start over, and yet, despite all of that, she had shown up to work as if nothing had happened, carrying the weight of her loss alone. Trump's expression did not change as he listened, but those who had worked with him long enough recognized the look in his eyes, a cold, calculating focus, the kind that meant he was already several steps ahead of the conversation. "This isn't a discussion," he said finally. "We're handling it." His orders were clear. He wanted options. He wanted solutions. He wanted to know exactly what it would take to replace what she had lost, and he wanted it done without delay. Without telling Maria, he began setting plans in motion for something she could never have imagined. He had spent years building some of the most luxurious properties in the world, negotiating billion-dollar deals, making decisions that altered industries, and yet in that moment none of that mattered. What mattered was that someone who had given her loyalty, who had worked tirelessly without complaint, was in need. And Donald Trump was not the kind of man to ignore that. His team moved quickly, fueled by the urgency in his tone. Calls were made, resources were secured, arrangements were finalized. Plans that would have taken weeks under normal circumstances were set into motion in mere hours. No one doubted that by the time Maria found out what was happening, everything would already be in place. Because when Donald Trump decided to take care of something, there was never any doubt that it would be done. Maria had spent her life standing in the background, working tirelessly without expectation of recognition or reward. She had built everything she had through sacrifice, through resilience, through an unshakable belief that hard work was its own reward. Even after the storm had taken everything from her, she had not asked for help. She had not sought pity. She had simply done what she had always done, kept going. But now, for the first time in her life, she was being called forward. When she received the message that Donald Trump wanted to see her in his office, she felt a quiet unease settle in her chest. She had never been summoned like this before. In all the years she had worked in his household, she had never given him a reason to notice her beyond the work she did. She had never sought favor, never asked for anything beyond the dignity of her job. As she stepped into the room, she braced herself. She had no idea what to expect. Trump was already waiting, his presence filling the space with the same quiet authority that had built empires, that had dictated negotiations and shaped industries. He did not waste time on pleasantries. He was not a man who spoke just to fill silence. "You're not alone," he said. Maria hesitated. The words were unexpected, foreign to her. She had spent her life believing that struggles were meant to be carried alone. She had never allowed herself to believe that someone else would bear the weight with her. Trump did not wait for a response. He was a man of action, a man who did not simply acknowledge problems, but solved them. He had already made his decision. The plans were already in motion. Without ceremony, without hesitation, he told her exactly what had been done. She had lost her home. That would be taken care of. A new one had already been arranged. She had lost everything she owned. That was no longer a problem. Every essential, every item of value that had been stripped away in the flood was being replaced. She had struggled in silence. That would end today. For the first time since the storm, since the floodwaters had taken everything from her, Maria felt the weight of it all crash over her. She had spent her life pushing forward, refusing to show weakness, refusing to ask for anything. And yet standing in front of her was a man who had seen her dedication, who had recognized her value, without her ever having to demand it. She had never imagined a moment like this. Her hands trembled. She tried to form words, but nothing came. Her voice, always so steady, always so sure, failed her. She had spent her life carrying burdens alone, and now, in the face of someone who had taken them from her without being asked, she found herself breaking. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from something she had never allowed herself to feel: relief. Trump watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his voice when he spoke again, something that carried weight beyond the moment. Loyalty deserves loyalty. Maria nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything but feel the overwhelming gratitude that filled her. She had spent her life serving others, and today, for the first time, someone had served her. Not out of obligation, not out of charity, but because Donald Trump did not let loyalty go unanswered. Every great leader leaves a legacy. Be part of the conversation. Smash that like button, share your opinion in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more powerful Trump insights. Word of what had just happened spread quickly through the estate. In the grand halls where efficiency ruled and routine dictated the rhythm of daily life, something had shifted. Staff members who had spent years moving quietly through their responsibilities, accustomed to a world where hierarchy defined everything, now found themselves pausing in disbelief. They had always known Donald Trump to be a man of action, a man who made decisions with precision and certainty. But what they had just witnessed was something different. There was a weight in the air, an unspoken understanding that something significant had taken place. Those who had worked alongside Maria for years, who had seen her dedication, her discipline, the quiet pride. She took in her work, stood in stunned silence. They had watched her endure hardship without complaint, had seen her show up every day despite losing everything. They had admired her resilience, though none of them had known the full extent of her suffering. Now, as they saw her standing before Trump, her hands shaking, tears slipping silently down her face, they understood something that had never been said aloud. She had never been invisible. She had never been just another employee, just another person moving through the background of power and wealth. She had been seen, recognized not for her position, but for her character. And today, she had been given something that no salary, no title, no amount of ambition could ever guarantee. Genuine loyalty returned in full. Maria tried to speak, but the words failed her. Her entire life, she had been the one to take care of others, to ensure that those around her had what they needed. She had spent decades providing without asking for anything in return, believing that her strength came from standing alone. But now, standing in front of Trump, hearing the certainty in his voice, she realized she no longer had to. Loyalty deserves loyalty, Trump said, his voice steady, final. You took care of others. Now it's time for someone to take care of you. The simplicity of his words made them all the more powerful. Maria's shoulders shook, the weight of years of quiet endurance finally breaking. She had prepared herself for a life of always giving, never receiving. And now, in a single moment, everything she had known had changed. The staff, many of whom had spent their lives believing that power existed only at the top, now saw it differently. Respect was not just demanded, it was earned. Leadership was not just about command, it was about standing by those who stood by you. And as Maria, still unable to fully comprehend the generosity she had received, lowered her head in quiet gratitude, those around her understood that this was more than just an act of kindness. It was a lesson, because in a world that often forgot the value of loyalty, Trump had just reminded everyone that true power was not in wealth nor in status. It was in never forgetting the people who had helped you build everything you had. News of what had happened did not stay contained within the walls of the estate. It moved like a quiet but undeniable force, spreading through the staff, reaching people beyond those who had witnessed it firsthand. What had started as a single act of recognition, a moment of unexpected generosity, soon became something more. At first, it was whispered among the employees, those who had worked in silence for years, believing that their efforts went unnoticed, now saw something they had never fully realized. Donald Trump was not a man who measured worth by titles, by wealth, by power alone. He had built his empire alongside those who worked behind the scenes, and unlike many in positions of authority, he had not forgotten that. The staff who had once seen him as an untouchable figure, someone far removed from their daily struggles, now viewed him differently. He was still the same man, still carried the same unwavering presence, still commanded respect with the force of his decisions. But there was something else now, something that could not be ignored. They had seen him take action without hesitation, not because it would benefit him, not because it was expected, but because he believed in rewarding loyalty. They had watched him recognize a woman who had never asked for recognition, who had carried the weight of her struggles alone, and they had seen how one act of acknowledgement could change the course of someone's life. Beyond the estate, the story reached those who had never met Maria, who had never seen Trump beyond the lens of business, politics, or headlines. The people who heard what had happened did not hear just another story of power and wealth. They heard something different. They heard about a woman who had worked her entire life without complaint, a woman who had lost everything in a single storm and yet had still shown up to work the next day, refusing to ask for help. They heard about a man who had noticed, who had not let her suffering go unaddressed, who had ensured that she would not stand alone when she needed it most. And for many, that changed something. People who had once dismissed Trump as just another powerful figure began to see him in a new light. They saw a leader who valued hard work, who believed in rewarding those who had earned their place, who understood that true success was not built alone. In a world where status often dictated treatment, where those without wealth were too often overlooked, this moment stood as a reminder that loyalty, resilience, and dedication still mattered. Maria, who had once believed her struggles belonged only to her, now found herself as something she had never expected to be. An example. She had thought that hardship was meant to be endured in silence, that people like her were meant to carry their burdens alone. But now, as she moved through her days, she did so with a newfound understanding. She was no longer just an employee. She was no longer just another worker in the background of someone else's success. She was proof that character was what defined a person, not their status. She was proof that sometimes the people who seemed the most invisible were the ones who deserved to be seen the most. And as those who heard her story carried it forward, one thing became clear. One act of kindness, given at the right moment, could change everything. Maria had spent her life believing that the measure of a person was not in what they had, but in how they carried themselves in the face of hardship. She had lived by that belief, working tirelessly, never expecting anything beyond what she had earned with her own hands. And yet, for the first time, she understood that strength did not mean facing everything alone. Her new home stood as a testament to that truth. It was not just a structure, not just a replacement for what she had lost. It was a symbol of something far greater, a reminder that loyalty, when given without expectation, was not forgotten. She had spent years giving, ensuring that others were taken care of, and now, for the first time, someone had taken care of her. But what mattered most was not what had been given to her. It was what she had gained. She still woke up before dawn, still moved through the kitchen with the same discipline, the same precision. But something had changed. She no longer worked out of obligation, out of necessity alone. She worked with a sense of purpose, a gratitude that could not be expressed in words. The others around her saw it. They saw how she carried herself, not just with resilience, but with an awareness that she was valued, that she had been recognized. It was not about wealth, not about power, but about knowing that she mattered. Trump, never one to dwell on moments, had already moved forward. He was not a man who sought acknowledgement for his actions, not one to revel in gratitude, but those who had witnessed what had happened, those who had seen firsthand the way he had stepped in when no one else had, understood something they had never fully realized before. He had built his empire not just on business, not just on deals and negotiations, but on an understanding of people. He had never believed in empty words, never placed value in gestures that served only to appear generous. To him, leadership was not about position, it was about responsibility. And so, when his staff spoke of what had happened, when they looked to him for an explanation, he gave them one that they would never forget. "You don't turn your back on the people who stand with you," he said. "That's what real leadership is about." The words settled over the room, not as a statement, but as a truth. Because in a world that so often rewarded power without principle, that overlooked those who gave everything without expecting anything in return, this moment stood as proof that real leadership was measured not by what a person gained, but by what they gave. Maria's story was no longer just her own. It had become something greater, something that carried weight beyond the walls where it had taken place. And as those who heard it passed it on, they did not share it as a story of charity. They did not speak of it as a moment of generosity. They spoke of it as a lesson in respect, in loyalty, in the kind of kindness that comes not from obligation, but from recognizing the value in people, no matter where they come from. This is more than just a story. It is a reminder that the people who build the foundations of our world, the ones who work quietly without seeking recognition, deserve to be seen. Share this story so that more people understand the power of standing by those who stand by you. Strength, strategy, and vision. If these qualities inspire you, you're in the right place. Show your support by liking this video, commenting your thoughts, and subscribing for more.